Formula One is one of the most exciting sports on the planet. But the problem is that there's a ton of terminology and rules that make it confusing as hell when you're trying to follow along. And of course, you don't want to look like an idiot in front of your friends who actually watch it, so you just nod and pretend you understand what they are saying. Well, lucky for you, I'm going to break down everything you need to know so you can actually follow the sport like a normal person instead of sitting there confused and angry. And really, once you understand the basics, F1 becomes way more entertaining because you'll actually know what's happening and why it matters. This video will cover about all parts of the cars, the rules, and the strategy that makes F1 the chess match on wheels that it is. And even if you already watch F1, I'll throw in some details that even hardcore fans don't know, so you can really flex on people at parties. And so let's get right into it and start with what they call the power unit. First thing you need to know is that F1 doesn't call it an engine anymore. They call it a power unit. Because it's not just one thing, it's a whole system of components working together. And if you call it just an engine around F1 people, they'll correct you like the annoying nerds they are. The power unit has several main components. First is the ICE, which stands for internal combustion engine. This is a 1.6-liter V6 turbo. And yes, 1.6 liters sounds pathetically small, like something you'd find in a Toyota Corolla. But this tiny engine produces around 700 to 800 horsepower on its own, which is absolutely mental. It revs up to 15,000 RPM, and for context, your regular car probably redlines at like 6,000 RPM. These engines are also insanely efficient, getting like 50% thermal efficiency, which means half the energy from the fuel actually gets converted to power. Your car probably gets like 30% if you're lucky, so yeah. F1 engineers are basically wizards, and then you have the turbocharger, which uses exhaust gases to spin a turbine that compresses air and shoves more of it into the engine. More air means more oxygen, which means bigger explosions, which means more power. It's the same concept as regular turbocharged cars, but way more advanced, and probably costs more than your house. Now here's where it gets weird. F1 cars also have two electric motors as part of the power unit. The first is called MGU-K, which stands for Motor Generator Unit. Kinetic. This is attached to the crankshaft, and it does two things. When you brake, it recovers kinetic energy and converts it to electrical energy that gets stored in the battery. Then when you accelerate, it can deploy that stored energy as an extra 160 horsepower boost. It's basically a more sophisticated version of the hybrid system in a Prius, except it actually makes the car faster instead of just making you look like you care about the environment. The second electric motor is the MGU-H, which stands for Motor Generator Unit, heat. This is connected to the turbocharger, and it's even more complex. It can either harvest energy from the spinning turbo, or it can use electrical energy to spin the turbo faster to eliminate turbo lag. Turbo lag is that delay you get in turbocharged cars where you step on the gas and nothing happens for a second. The MGU-H basically eliminates that, so you get instant power. It's genius engineering, but it's also stupidly expensive and complicated, which is why they're getting rid of it in the next generation of engines. All of this together, the ICE, Turbo, MGU-K, and MGU-H, produces around 1,000 horsepower total, and it all fits in a package about the size of a large suitcase, which is absurd. So that's how you make 1,000 horsepower, but now you need to actually get that power to the wheels, and that's where the gearbox comes in. F1 cars use an 8-speed sequential gearbox with a semi-automatic system. Sequential means you can only shift up or down one gear at a time. You can't skip gears like you can in a regular manual car. The drivers shift using paddles behind the steering wheel. Right paddle to shift up, left paddle to shift down. The gearbox itself is insanely strong because it has to handle 1,000 horsepower and also deal with the massive forces from downforce pushing the car into the ground. Gear shifts happen in less than 50 milliseconds, which is faster than you can blink, and the gearbox is actually part of the car's structure. It's mounted directly to the back of the engine, and the rear suspension attaches to it, so it has to be strong enough to handle all those loads. If your gearbox breaks in a race, you're done, and you probably just destroyed a $500,000 piece of equipment. Good job. Now, let's talk about the aero, because this is genuinely what makes F1 cars so fast. The engine gives you power, but the aerodynamics let you use that power without flying off into the barriers at every corner. The front wing is the first thing that hits the air. It's that complicated-looking thing at the very front with all the little flaps and angles. Its job is to generate downforce on the front of the car to keep the front tires planted, and it also directs airflow around and under the car to feed air to other parts. Teams spend millions of dollars developing front wings because tiny changes in the angle or shape can make huge differences in lap time. The front wing is also incredibly fragile, so if you even slightly touch another car or run over a curb too hard, you can break it and destroy your race. Drivers then have to limp back to the pits at like 50 miles per hour because a broken front wing makes the car completely undrivable. The floor is actually the most important aerodynamic component. The entire underside of the car is designed to create a low-pressure area underneath, which sucks the car down to the ground. This is called ground effect, and it's how F1 cars generate most of their downforce. The floor has these tunnels and channels that accelerate the air underneath, which creates low pressure and basically vacuums the car to the track. The lower the car sits, the more downforce it generates, which is why you'll see F1 cars sparking on straights. That's the floor hitting the ground because the car is being pushed down so hard. The rear wing does the opposite of the front wing in terms of where it's located, but the same thing in terms of function. It creates downforce on the rear of the car to keep the rear tires planted. But here's the interesting part. The rear wing has this thing called DRS, which stands for Drag Reduction System. Now, all that downforce is great for corners, but it slows you down on straights, which is why DRS exists. Well, even though they have removed DRS in 2026, it's better to know what it actually does because everyone still talks about it. Older races had it, and honestly, understanding DRS will help you understand why overtaking is so complicated in F1. DRS is basically a flap on the rear wing that can open up. When it's closed, the rear wing creates maximum downforce but also maximum drag. When you open the DRS flap, you reduce the drag, which means you can go faster in a straight line. In qualifying, drivers can use DRS wherever they want to get the fastest possible lap time. But in the race, you can only use it in specific DRS zones on the track, and only if you're within 1 second of the car in front of you at the DRS detection point. The driver just hits a button on the steering wheel and the flap opens, giving them like 10 to 15 kilometers per hour more speed on the straight, which is usually enough to pull alongside and overtake. Then the DRS automatically closes when they brake for the next corner. Some people love DRS because it helps overtaking and makes racing more exciting. Other people hate it because it feels artificial and makes passing too easy. Those people are usually the ones getting passed, so nobody cares about their opinion. But the real issue is that DRS can sometimes be too powerful on certain tracks, so instead of helping you get alongside for a proper battle, it just gives you a massive speed advantage and you blow past like they're standing still. That's boring. Now let's talk about the suspension. F1 cars use double wishbone pushrod suspension at both the front and rear. This is different from what you'll find on road cars, and it's designed to keep the tires in perfect contact with the ground at all times while also allowing the car to ride over curbs and bumps. The suspension is also incredibly stiff because the car needs to maintain a precise ride height to maximize the ground effect from the floor. If the car bounces around too much, you lose downforce and the car becomes unpredictable. The suspension components are also part of the aerodynamic package. Everything is shaped to direct airflow in specific ways, so even the suspension arms have little winglets and sculpted shapes to manage the air. It's obsessive attention to detail that probably doesn't make a huge difference, but when you're fighting for hundredths of a second per lap, everything matters. Coming to F1 brakes. Next, honestly to tell you, man, F1 brakes are insane. They're carbon-carbon disc brakes, which means both the disc and the brake pads are made of carbon fiber. These things can operate at temperatures up to 1,000 degrees Celsius, and they glow red hot when the drivers are braking hard. At high speeds, drivers can pull up to 5 to 6 Gs of deceleration, which is enough force to make your eyeballs feel like they're being pushed out of your skull. But here's the thing, these brakes only work well when they're hot. At the start of a race or after a safety car, the brakes are cold and they don't have much grip, so drivers have to weave around and brake hard to generate heat. If you brake too hard on cold brakes, you'll just lock up the tires and flat spot them, which ruins the tire and creates a vibration for the rest of the stint. So brake management is actually a skill. F1 also has brake-by-wire on the rear axle, which means the brake pedal doesn't directly control the rear brakes. Instead, it's all electronic, and the system has to blend the hydraulic braking with the energy recovery from the MGU-K. This is complex because the driver needs consistent brake feel. but the car is also trying to harvest as much energy as possible. Get this wrong, and the brake pedal feels weird and unpredictable, which is a nightmare for drivers. Let's get deeper into tires because tire strategy is literally half the race. Pirelli is the sole tire supplier, and they bring 5 different compounds throughout the season. C0 is the hardest compound, and C5 is the softest. But for each race weekend, Pirelli only brings 3 of these compounds, and they rename them to hard, medium, and soft for that specific race. So the soft tire at Monaco might be a C5, but the soft tire at Monza might be a C3. This is confusing and stupid, but it's how F1 works. The compounds are color-coded. Hard is white, medium is yellow, and soft is red. There's also intermediate, green, for damp conditions, and full wet, blue, for heavy rain. The softer the compound, the more grip it has, but the faster it wears out. Soft tires might only last 10 to 15 laps on some circuits before they completely fall off a cliff and become useless. Hard tires might last 40 to 50 laps, but they're slower. Teams have to decide which tires to use based on the track characteristics, temperature, and their strategy. Here's a fun fact that even some F1 fans don't know. Tire blankets are used to preheat the tires before they go on the car. The tires are kept at around 70 to 100 degrees Celsius in these electric blankets because cold tires have 0 grip. When you see drivers doing those crazy weaving motions behind the safety car, they're trying to keep temperature in the tires. If the tires get too cold, they fall out of their operating window and you're basically driving on ice. But they're banning tire blankets in a few years to save costs, which is going to make things interesting because drivers will have to spend more time getting heat into the tires, which means more accidents on cold tires. Fun. Next is the F. One steering wheel is not a steering wheel. It's basically a spaceship control panel that happens to also steer the car. It has like 20 plus buttons, switches, and dials that control everything from engine modes to brake balance to DRS to radio. It's completely customizable for each driver, and it costs around $50,000 to $100,000 to make. If you crash and destroy the steering wheel, that's an expensive mistake. Some of the controls include a multi-function display that shows lap times, tire temps, fuel levels, and about 100 other data points. There's a rotary switch for brake balance that lets drivers shift the brake bias between front and rear mid-corner to optimize braking. There's engine mode switches to manage battery deployment and fuel usage. There's a bunch of buttons for radio, pit limiter, DRS, drink system. Yes, they have a water bottle tube that goes into the helmet, and overtake modes that give you more power for a few seconds. The steering wheel also has LED lights at the top that change color based on RPM, so drivers know when to shift without having to look at the dashboard. It's an insane amount of things to manage while also driving at 200 miles per hour and battling other cars, which is why F1 drivers are some of the most skilled athletes on the planet, even if they don't look like athletes because they're all like 5 feet 7 inches and weigh 140 pounds. Now you understand all the technical components, but here's the brutal reality. Not all teams have access to the same resources, which means some cars are just objectively better than others. There are basically 3 tiers of teams in F1. At the top, you have Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari. These are the giants spending hundreds of millions building the fastest cars possible. They have the best engineers, the biggest budgets, and they're constantly pushing the limits of what's legal in the regulations. And then you have the midfield teams like McLaren, Aston Martin, and Alpine. These guys are competitive and can occasionally challenge the top teams or even win a race if things go their way, but they're not consistently at the front. They're basically good enough to make things interesting, but not good enough to dominate. And finally, you have the backmarker teams like Haas, Kick Sauber, and Williams. These teams are basically just trying to survive. They're happy if they score a single point, and most races they're just circulating at the back hoping not to get lapped too many times. It's depressing, but someone has to be last. The performance gap is absolutely massive. The best car can be 2 to 3 seconds per lap faster than the worst car, and over a 50-lap race that adds up to being lapped multiple times. It's brutal to watch, and it's why F1 introduced a budget cap to try to level the playing field. But the top teams are rich and smart, so they're still finding creative ways to spend money on things that aren't technically part of the cap, because apparently bending rules is a core skill in F1. So that's everything you need to know about F1 cars and how they work. Once you understand the power unit, the aero, the tires, and all the other technical components, watching F1 becomes way more interesting because you'll actually know what the commentators are talking about, instead of just watching colorful cars go around in circles. And look, if you want to actually get into F1, just pick a driver or team to support and go from there. Don't be one of those bandwagon fans who only cheers for whoever's winning, because that's genuinely pathetic. Pick someone you like and stick with them even when they're struggling at the back of the grid fighting for 15th place. That's what real fans do. Loyalty matters. All right, subscribe right now or you'll forget everything I just taught you within the next 10 minutes, and you'll be back to nodding along like a confused idiot. Also like the video, because it helps the algorithm and apparently that matters. Now get out of here and go watch some actual F1.